Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something really interesting? It's about how events happening around the world can sometimes feel a bit overwhelming, you know? We found this article from 2011
Oh, wow.
called A Formiga y Europa, which translates to the ant and Europe. And get this,
Okay.
it uses fire ants as an analogy to explain what Europe needs to do to survive global turmoil. Kind of unique perspective, right?
Yeah, definitely. What's really striking is how this article was written over a decade ago
Yeah.
during a major economic crisis in Europe.
Right?
And it almost seems even more relevant today.
I think so too.
Yeah. Don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The author, Luis Azevedo Rodrigues, is a paleontologist
Okay.
and a science communicator.
Interesting.
So he kind of brings this blend of scientific observation and social commentary to the table.
I see.
Who would have thought we'd be looking to ants for political insights?
Yeah, that's the beauty of analogies, isn't it? They can make these complex ideas
Right.
surprisingly accessible to people. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's break down this ant analogy a bit.
Okay.
The article focuses on fire ants and their incredible ability to form these living rafts when their nests get flooded.
Wow.
So you've got thousands of ants
Oh, wow.
literally clinging to each other, forming this structure that can float on water.
That's pretty amazing.
It's a pretty powerful image.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And it perfectly captures the author's point about European unity.
Right.
You know, he argues that just like those ants, European nations are stronger together, especially when facing these global challenges.
And there's this research from Georgia Tech that he cites in the article.
Oh, interesting.
They actually put these ant rafts in the lab and study how they worked.
Oh, wow.
And they proved that ants are way more likely to survive a flood when they work together.
Makes sense.
It makes you think about how individual nations might struggle to stay afloat amidst
Yeah.
all the political and economic storms brewing on the world stage, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And, you know, this article was written back in 2011, a time of economic crisis.
Right.
But fast forward to today, and we see a different kind of turmoil emerging. You've got figures like Trump and his brand of extremism gaining traction in the U.S.
Right.
You've got Russia under Putin becoming increasingly aggressive and expansionist. And even within Europe itself, there's this worrying rise of the far right.
Yeah, it's almost like that flood that Rodriguez was worried about back then is starting to happen now, but in a different form.
Yeah.
What makes this even more complex is that these challenges are coming from both inside and outside Europe's borders.
Right.
It's like being squeezed from all sides.
Which brings us to the central question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is this ant raft metaphor still relevant today? And if so, how can it help us understand and maybe even navigate this new wave of challenges facing Europe?
It's a tough question.
But I think the analogy still holds weight, you know? Rodriguez argues that Europe needs to find a unifying cause, a shared purpose that kind of transcends individual national interests.
Okay.
He thinks that focusing on internal cohesion might be even more crucial than addressing external threats.
And he draws a parallel between Europe in 2011 and the state of his own country, Portugal, at the time.
Right.
Both facing this economic and social turmoil. And he saw this lack of unity as a major obstacle to overcoming those challenges.
He criticizes this idea that the European Commission could somehow solve every problem for individual nations. Instead, he emphasizes that solutions require active participation and a sense of shared responsibility from each member state.
So it's not enough to just rely on a central authority like the European Commission.
Yeah.
Each nation needs to contribute its unique strengths to make the raft work.
Precisely. And here's where the analogy gets even more interesting. I think Rodriguez suggests that sacrificing any part of the group, any nation, could weaken the entire structure.
Wow.
He really advocates for inclusivity and recognizing the value each nation brings to the table, even if they have differences.
That makes me think about the rise of nationalism and these internal divisions within many European countries.
Yeah.
It's like the raft is facing threats from within as well as from these external forces.
Exactly. And those internal divisions can make it even harder to present a united front against external pressures. Like the rise of a more assertive Russia.
So how can Europe apply this ant raft principle in today's world?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
But with the rise of extremism and nationalist sentiments, how can they even agree on a shared purpose?
Right.
It's like those ants are starting to bicker amongst themselves while the floodwaters are rising.
That's the challenge. It requires a delicate balancing act. They need to find a way to kind of reconcile national interests with the greater good of a unified Europe.
Yeah.
It's a tall order.
Right.
But history has shown that seemingly impossible things can happen when people work together towards a common goal.
It's like Rodrigues is challenging us to look beyond those divisions and find that common thread, the shared purpose that can bind Europe together in the face of these incredibly complex challenges.
He's reminding us that just like those fire ants instinctively linking together for survival, European nations have a choice. They can either cling to their individual differences and risk being swept away, or they can find a way to leverage their collective strength and navigate these turbulent waters together.
It doesn't sound like he offers any easy solutions.
Yeah, not really.
It's more like he's presenting this thought-provoking analogy and leaving us to ponder how it applies to the current situation.
Exactly. He leaves us with this powerful image and a series of challenging questions. But he doesn't prescribe a specific course of action. He kind of trusts us to wrestle with these ideas and come to our own conclusions.
You know, it's interesting. He doesn't really talk about science and technology in this article. But as we've been talking, I can't help but think they could play a big part in this whole ant raft thing.
That's a really good point. I mean, could there be some scientific advancements or technological innovations that could actually help, you know, foster cooperation and address some of these global challenges? Like, maybe those ants have something to teach us about how we to build a stronger, more connected raft.
Across borders. In ways that we couldn't have imagined even a decade ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could we use that to promote understanding and cooperation on a larger scale?
It's definitely a possibility. Worth exploring. Imagine if scientific research could help us identify shared threats and come up with solutions that benefit everyone, regardless of national boundaries, or if technology could facilitate communication and collaboration between nations in a way that transcends political differences.
It's almost like science and technology could be the building blocks for that shared purpose that Rodrigues talks about.
Absolutely. They could be the tools that help us bridge those divisions and create a more unified and resilient Europe and maybe even a more interconnected world. It's really fascinating to think about. Makes you wonder what kind of future we could build if we embrace that kind of collaborative spirit.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that this 2011 article with its simple but powerful analogy, has given us a whole new way to think about the challenges facing Europe today.
Absolutely.
And maybe even a glimmer of hope for how we might overcome them.
I totally agree. It reminds us that sometimes the answers to our most pressing problems can be found in unexpected places. Even in the behavior of tiny creatures like fire ants.
It leaves us with a lot to think about.
It does.
If Europe is this ant raft, what unique strengths can each nation contribute to make that raft even stronger in fostering that unity and resilience?
Those are great questions. And I really encourage everyone listening to keep exploring these ideas. After all, just like those fire ants working together to survive the flood, we all have a role to play in an interconnected future.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We hope it's given you some new ideas and inspired you to look at the world in new ways. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.